Jake Runestad is an Emmy-winning composer, and he earns his second Grammy nomination for his album called A Dream So Bright. Runestad was inspired to write A Dreams of the Fallen after reading about soldiers coming back from the Iraq War, experiencing personal trauma. Runestad met Brian Turner, a former poet who served in the Afghanistan War, and it helped inspire him to create the piece about post-traumatic stress disorders in veterans. The Minneapolis-based composer thanks the Forest City for his passion for music.
I grew up in Rockford doing a lot of service work, volunteering in the community, working for different organizations. And I think when I started to compose really seriously, I was able to kind of bridge those worlds of service and of music.